From farmer to legend, the story of America's most lethal tank commander. Imagine this: one crew, one tank, 83 days of combat, and 258 enemy vehicles destroyed. 12 confirmed German tanks, more than 1,000 enemy soldiers put out of action, and around 250 prisoners taken. It sounds like fiction, but it is completely true. This is the story of Lafayette Pool, the real man behind Brad Pitt's character in the film Fury. From farmer to legend, the story of America's most lethal tank commander. Imagine this: one crew, one tank, 83 days of combat, and 258 enemy vehicles destroyed. 12 confirmed German tanks, more than 1,000 enemy soldiers put out of action, and around 250 prisoners taken. It sounds like fiction, but it is completely true. This is the story of Lafayette Pool, the real man behind Brad Pitt's character in the film Fury.
Chapter 2: War Daddy and His Crew. Pool commanded a tank in the elite 3rd Armored Division, known as Spearhead. He always gave his tanks the same name, In the Mood, after the famous Glenn Miller swing hit. That driving, relentless rhythm perfectly captured his style of fighting. He called his 4 crewmen his pups, and they called him War Daddy, because he looked after them like a father. Driver Wilbert Richards, nicknamed Groundhog, could park a 33-ton tank with surgical precision under heavy fire. Radio operator Bertrand Close, known as Schoolboy, was a 17-year-old kid in glasses who cut down enemy infantry with the Hull machine gun without flinching. Gunner Willis Aller, called Marmite, was calm and methodical, always with soot on his face from the tank goggles. And loader Delbert Boggs, nicknamed Zeke, legend has it a judge gave him a choice between prison and the army. His speed at loading the cannon was extraordinary. A well-trained crew needed 5 seconds to spot a target and fire. Pool's crew did it in under 3. Chapter 3: The Tactics That Won. Shermans were outmatched by German Panthers and Tigers in armor and in range. Pool knew this, so his tactics were blunt and brutal. Never retreat, close the distance at full speed, and hit them in the flank. On top of that, Pool suffered from claustrophobia and preferred to fight with his head out of the commander's hatch. It was extremely dangerous, but it gave him a complete, 3-dimensional view of the battlefield. He spotted ambushes and enemy guns seconds before anyone else. In August of '44, he pushed ahead of the column alone. In 3 days, 4 German tanks destroyed, including 2 Panthers, 3 anti-tank guns, and 50 enemy vehicles. For that action, Pool was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. Chapter 4: 3 Lost Tanks. Over 83 days, the crew lost 3 tanks and walked away from everyone. The first, In the Mood, was taken out by a German Panzerfaust fired from less than 50 yards away. All 5 men got out in time. The second tank was destroyed by friendly fire. American P-38 Lightning fighters mistook them for Germans and hit them with rockets. Miraculously, all 5 escaped the burning wreck. The third and final battle came on September 19, 1944, near the German town of Münstergusch. Command had ordered Pool to stand down. In a few days, the crew was supposed to go home to the United States as war heroes for a bond drive. Veteran gunner Aller had already been sent back. His replacement was a 20-year-old rookie named Paul King. A Panther hit them from ambush. The first armor-piercing round punched through the turret. King was killed instantly. The second shell tore the tank apart. Pool, standing in the hatch, was hit by severe shrapnel wounds to his right leg. His crew pulled him from the wreck seconds before the ammunition exploded.
War Daddy's crew, 5 men, 1 tank. Behind every great commander stands a team. Lafayette Pool had 4 of those men. He chose each one himself. He called them his pups, and they called him War Daddy.
First, Wilbert Richards at the controls. 24 years old, short, compact, with a baby face, which is exactly why they called him Baby. But behind the controls of a 33-ton Sherman, nobody came close. Poole used to say Richards could parallel park a tank in the middle of New York City during rush hour. Under fire, he reversed through narrow streets like it was nothing. But he had one fear. During training, he once got stuck inside a locked tank. After that, he was terrified of burning alive. So he always drove with his hatch open, just in case he needed to get out fast.
Second, Bertrand Close at the Hull machine gun. 17 years old, wire-rimmed glasses, a skinny kid from Portland, Oregon, he looked exactly like a schoolboy. That was his nickname. But behind his .30 caliber machine gun, Schoolboy was ruthless, cold, methodical, without hesitation. In the heat of battle, he would jump in to help the loader, anything to keep the tank firing.
Third, Willis Oler, at the gun site. 29 years old, the oldest man in the crew, from Illinois. Calm, steady, methodical, the complete opposite of the chaos around him. His face was always covered in soot from the tank goggles. He barely left the site. In the seconds it took the tank to close on a target, he had to find it, judge the distance, pick the right shell, and hit it clean. He did it over and over again. Shortly before the final battle, Oler was rotated home as part of a planned veteran transfer. When he learned what had happened to his crew without him, that feeling stayed with him for the rest of his life.
Fourth, Delbert Boggs, the loader. 22 years old, from Lancaster, Ohio. A legend circulated in the crew. Apparently, a judge had given him a choice between prison and the army. That earned him the nickname Jailbird. Lean but tough and incredibly strong. His job, in a hot, cramped compartment with no brakes again and again, was to lift and load 25-pound shells as fast as humanly possible. His speed was what gave Poole's tank its unstoppable rate of fire. And the last one, Paul King, the replacement. 20 years old, a private from Tennessee, an experienced soldier, but not part of the crew Poole had built over months of combat. He took Oler's place on September 19, 1944, near the German town of Münsterbusch. The first shell from a German Panther punched through the turret. Paul King was killed instantly. Part 2. Knights, Moral Choices, and the Price of Glory. Chapter 5. 10 seconds between life and death. In the Norman hedgerows, visibility sometimes dropped to just a few dozen meters. At night, tanks became blind giants. But war does not wait for sunrise. That night, Poole's crew was slowly pushing forward. Around the next bend in the hedgerow, they came face to face with a German Panther, 30 meters between them. That's it. On paper, the Sherman had no chance. The Panther's front armor was nearly impossible to penetrate. Its gun could punch straight through a Sherman from 2 kilometers away, and here they were, 30 meters apart. Both commanders spotted each other in the same moment, and that is where everything Poole had drilled into his crew for months made the difference. The German gunner fired first, twice, but panic and haste worked against him. The first shell screamed over the turret. The second ricocheted off the ground right in front of the tank. Willis Oler did not rush. One shot, straight into the turret ring, the weak point where the turret meets the hull. The Panther exploded from the inside. The whole thing lasted no more than 10 seconds. Poole proved it again. Crew skill beats armor every time. Chapter 6. The Price of Mercy. August 44. The Falaise Pocket. American forces had closed the ring around the German armies. Pool's tank was out front, destroying everything in its path. Then, a group of German soldiers, on foot, no weapons. They had abandoned their vehicles, just men running. Over the radio, Pool's commander suddenly heard his voice, "I don't have the heart to kill them." Pool, the man who had destroyed hundreds of enemy vehicles, paused for a moment in front of running men. But the moment passed. He understood the brutal truth of war. Today they run, tomorrow they get new weapons, and tomorrow they kill other Americans. A hard order came over the radio. Bertrand Close opened fire. This story is not about cruelty. It is about what war forces good people to do. Chapter 7. The achievement they refused to honor. From August 29th to August 31st, 1944, Pool did something that became legend in the division. He pushed far ahead of the main force, essentially alone, deliberately drawing the enemy out. In 3 days, his crew destroyed 4 German tanks, including 2 Panthers at the same time, 3 concealed anti-tank guns, and around 50 enemy vehicles. Everyone who witnessed it was certain Pool deserved the Medal of Honor, the highest military award in the United States. He was nominated twice. The Army said no. The reason was absurd. A tank is classified as a crew-served weapon, which meant, according to the bureaucrats, that personal heroism by a tank commander could not be recognized with the highest award. Veterans still call it one of the greatest injustices of the war. Chapter 8. When War Never Lets Go. The German shell at Münsterbusch ended Pool's fighting career. His leg was amputated. His war was over. But not his love for the army. In 1948, he returned to service with a prosthetic leg. For another 12 years, he trained young tankers, everything the war had taught him. He retired in 1960. It seemed like a well-earned peace, but war struck his family one more time. His son Jerry followed in his father's footsteps. He became a Special Forces officer. He served in classified operations in Vietnam. In March of 1970, the helicopter carrying his reconnaissance team was shot down over Cambodia. Jerry was listed as missing in action for more than 30 years. It was not until 2001 that his remains were finally identified through DNA testing and buried with full military honors. Lafayette Pool never learned of it. War Daddy passed away in 1991. The Last Battle. September 19th, 1944. Münsterbusch. A small German village on the western approaches to Aachen. It was here that the war placed its final period in the story of America's most successful tank crew. The bitter irony was this: the battle was never meant to happen. Not because there was no enemy ahead, but because command had already decided the legendary crew was going home. In the United States, they were expected to tour the country, meet the public, and help sell war bonds. That morning, Pool received an order that was completely unusual for him. Do not lead the advance. Stay on the flank. Do not take risks. The German commander did not rush. He waited until the American tanks entered the kill zone. He chose Pool's tank and fired 2 shots almost simultaneously. The first armor-piercing shell penetrated the turret and exploded inside. Paul King was killed instantly. The second shell struck the hull. The tank suffered catastrophic internal damage. Pool, as always, was standing in the open commander's hatch. The blast wave stunned him. Fragments tore apart his right leg. But combat instinct acted faster than pain. He managed to order the crew to abandon the tank. Richards, Close, and Boggs escaped through their hatches. Poole tried to climb out after them. His leg would not hold. At that moment, the disabled tank lurched forward and slid into a shell crater. Poole was partially thrown from the turret, and the edge of the hatch pinned him in place. They came back, under fire, to the burning tank. They pulled their commander free and dragged him to safety seconds before the ammunition inside the tank began to detonate. Medics evacuated Poole to a field hospital. Surgeons did everything they could, but his right leg had to be amputated, about 20 centimeters above the knee. September 19th, 1944, 83 days after the beginning of the fighting. The War of War Daddy was over.
The American M4 Sherman medium tank became the backbone of U.S. armored forces during the Second World War. It was on different versions of this tank that the legendary commander Lafayette Pool fought. The United States produced an enormous number of these vehicles. In total, nearly 49,000 Shermans were built. For comparison, Germany produced roughly 6,000 Panthers and about 1,350 Tigers. But despite these numbers, the Sherman had several serious weaknesses, and American crews had to face them every time they went into battle. The first problem was armor and firepower on early models. On paper, the Sherman was clearly inferior to German tanks. For example, the German Panther, equipped with a long-barreled 75mm gun, could penetrate the Sherman's frontal armor from more than 2,000 yards away. Meanwhile, early Shermans armed with the 75mm M3 gun could penetrate the Panther's frontal armor only at extremely close range, roughly 100 yards, and only under ideal conditions. Another issue was fire risk. Early Shermans developed a bad reputation for catching fire after being hit. German tank crews even gave them mocking nicknames. They called them Zippos, after the famous lighter, or Ronsons, referencing a brand whose slogan said, "Lights every time." The reason was the location of ammunition inside the tank. When the armor was penetrated, the shells could detonate quickly. There was also the problem of the tank's vulnerable underside. During the fighting in Normandy, American tank crews encountered dense, centuries-old hedgerows. To cross them, a Sherman often had to climb upward, lifting the front of the tank. At that moment, the vehicle exposed its thin belly armor, and that made it an easy target for German anti-tank guns. In cities and close combat, another danger appeared. The Sherman's thin side armor could be penetrated by German anti-tank weapons known as Panzerfausts. Their shape charges could burn through more than 200 millimeters of armor. It was exactly this type of weapon that destroyed Lafayette Pool's first tank. However, American engineers constantly improved the Sherman. Eventually, Pool's crew received one of the newest versions, the M4A176W. This modification solved several critical problems. First, it carried a new 76mm gun. This more powerful weapon could penetrate the side armor of a Panther from around 2,000 yards and its frontal armor from about 500 yards. Second, the tank introduced what was called wet ammunition storage. The ammunition racks were surrounded by special containers filled with a mixture of water, ethylene glycol, and anti-corrosion chemicals. This dramatically reduced the chance of fire or catastrophic explosion when the armor was penetrated. Engineers also found a solution for the hedgerow problem. They began welding steel prongs to the front of Sherman tanks, made from captured German beach obstacles. These modified vehicles became known as Reiner tanks. With these attachments, Shermans could break straight through the hedgerows without lifting the front of the tank and exposing the vulnerable underside. Some historians and popular media sometimes describe the Sherman as a death trap, but Lafayette Pool's experience tells a different story. On the European battlefield, the average Sherman tank survived only about 11 days in combat. Yet Pool's crew fought for 83 days in the most dangerous conditions at the front. They survived because they relied on the Sherman's real strengths. The tank was fast, maneuverable, and mechanically reliable, and its gun had an excellent rate of fire. But the most important advantage was the crew itself. Lafayette Pool proved one of the fundamental truths of armored warfare. An aggressive, disciplined, and perfectly coordinated crew can matter far more than the thickness of the armor surrounding them.
Inside Lafayette Pool's Sherman tank crew, there was a special nickname. The 4 soldiers who served under him called themselves the Pups. Pool had personally selected each of them for the crew, and over time, they became one of the most effective tank teams of the war. The crew included Wilbert Baby Richards, the driver, Bertram Schoolboy Close, the assistant driver and whole machine gunner, Willis Groundhog Oler, the gunner, and Delbert Zeke Boggs, the loader. Interestingly, the nickname the Pups was something the crew gave themselves, and they had another nickname, this time for their commander. They called Lafayette Pool War Daddy. It was not a joke or mockery. It was a sign of deep respect and loyalty to the man who led them again and again into the most dangerous battles. This unique bond between the crew began long before they ever reached the battlefield. It started during training. Pool demanded intense discipline and constant practice from his men, but at the same time, he showed genuine concern for their safety and survival. He trained them hard, but he also took responsibility for them. Over time, the crew began to see him as more than just a commander. He became both their leader and their protector. Interestingly, Pool himself was not much older than the rest of the crew. In fact, he was even younger than his gunner, Willis Oler. But age did not matter.
Pool's strong personality, determination, and natural leadership made him the center of the team. His crew trusted him completely. They knew one important thing. Pool would never ask them to do something he would not do himself, and he would never risk their lives for a meaningless objective. That trust turned 5 soldiers into something more than a tank crew. They became a family. And in the middle of the most dangerous battles of the war, the Knots followed their war daddy anywhere.
Lafayette Pool survived the loss of 3 different tanks during the war, and each time survival came down to a combination of skill, discipline, and pure luck. But luck alone was not enough. Pool's survival depended on several things: the exceptional training of his crew, their lightning-fast reactions in moments of crisis, and the absolute loyalty they had toward their commander. Another small detail also played an important role. Pool and his driver, Wilbert Richards, preferred to fight with their hatches open. Pool usually stood halfway out of the turret while commanding the battle, and Richards had a deep fear of being trapped inside a burning tank. Keeping the hatches open meant one crucial advantage. If the tank was hit, the crew could escape in seconds. Over the course of the war, Pool lost 3 tanks. Each time, the crew managed to survive.
The first tank was destroyed in Normandy. A German infantryman fired a Panzerfaust. The shaped charge penetrated the side armor of the Sherman. Smoke immediately filled the interior of the tank. Pool reacted without hesitation. He shouted the order to abandon the vehicle. Thanks to constant training, the crew moved almost automatically. Within seconds, all 5 men escaped through their hatches. They ran clear of the tank just before the fire reached the ammunition.
The second tank was lost in a tragic accident. American P-38 Lightning fighter planes mistakenly attacked Pool's Sherman. Rockets struck the turret and the engine compartment. Again, Pool gave the same command: abandon the tank. The crew moved with practiced precision. They climbed out and ran for cover. Moments later, the burning tank exploded as its ammunition detonated. Miraculously, the crew suffered only minor injuries. The third tank was destroyed during the Battle of Münsterbusch. This would be Pool's final battle. A German Panther opened fire from a concealed position. Armor-piercing shells struck the Sherman. The gunner, Paul King, was killed instantly. Pool himself was severely wounded. The explosion shattered his right leg. Despite the shock and pain, he still managed to give the order: abandon the tank. 3 crew members escaped immediately, but Pool could not climb out. His damaged leg failed, and when the disabled tank slid into a shell crater, the commander became trapped in the hatch. At that moment, the situation seemed hopeless. But his crew came back. They ran back to the burning tank under enemy fire. Ignoring the danger, they pulled their commander free
and dragged him away from the vehicle. Only seconds later, the ammunition inside the Sherman detonated. Medics soon arrived and evacuated Pool to a field hospital.
Lafayette Pool survived the destruction of 3 tanks, not only because of skill, not only because of luck. He survived because his crew trusted him completely. And when the moment came, the pups refused to leave their war daddy behind.
After the war ended, the members of Lafayette Pool's famous tank crew slowly returned to civilian life. Each of them carried the memories of war in a different way. Wilbert "Baby" Richards, the driver, managed to build a quiet life after the war. He stayed in touch with the other members of the crew and, whenever possible, attended reunions of veterans from the 3rd Armored Division. For Richards, those gatherings were a chance to reconnect with the men who had shared the most intense moments of his life. Bertram "Schoolboy" Close, the assistant driver and hall machine gunner, also returned home. Like many veterans, the experiences he had lived through inside Pool's Sherman tank shaped the rest of his life. The war had changed him, and those memories never fully faded. Delbert "Zeke" Boggs, the loader, carried the identity of one of Pool's pups with pride throughout his life. He always remembered the bond that had united the crew and the trust they had shared in battle. But the most emotionally difficult story belonged to Willis "Groundhog" Aller, the gunner. Shortly before the crew's final battle, Aller had been transferred back to the United States. Because of that administrative decision, he did not take part in the last fight, the battle in which Lafayette Pool was severely wounded and lost his leg. In his place, a young replacement gunner, Paul Kenneth King, took the position in the turret. King was killed during that battle. For the rest of his life, Aller carried a complicated mix of emotions. There was relief because the transfer had saved his life. But there was also the heavy burden of survivor's guilt. He knew that chance and paperwork had kept him alive. And he often wondered what might have happened if he had still been there with his crew, on the day when they needed him the most. Lafayette Pool's first tank carried a name that would later become legendary. It was called In the Mood. But that first Sherman would not survive long in combat. In late June of 1944, during the brutal fighting in Normandy, Pool's tank was destroyed. The battle took place during an American operation aimed at eliminating a German defensive position northeast of St. Lo. The soldiers of the U.S. 3rd Armored Division were advancing through one of the most difficult landscapes in the war. The region was known as the Bocage. Massive hedgerows divided the countryside into small fields surrounded by thick vegetation and high earthen walls. Each field was like a natural fortress. Visibility was often limited to less than 50 yards. In this environment, German infantry became extremely dangerous. Many of them carried Panzerfaust anti-tank weapons. These simple but powerful launchers could destroy a tank at very close range. On June 29th, during their very first day of combat, Pool and his crew proved how effective they could be. In a short period of time, they destroyed 3 German vehicles and killed more than 70 enemy soldiers. But soon after, their Sherman entered the small village of Les Forges. The area had already been reported as cleared of enemy forces. The tank slowly moved through a narrow street between stone buildings. Everything seemed quiet. Then suddenly, a German soldier stepped out of a doorway. He was extremely close, less than 50 yards away. The soldier raised a Panzerfaust and fired. The shaped charge rocket struck the side of the Sherman. Panzerfaust warheads were capable of penetrating more than 200 millimeters of armor. The blast burned straight through the tank's side. Inside the vehicle, a jet of molten metal tore into the fighting compartment. The tank shook violently. Smoke began filling the interior. Warning alarms started ringing. At that moment, months of training saved the crew. Pool immediately shouted the order, "Bail out!" The response was instant. Pool, driver Wilbert Richards, machine gunner Bertram Close, gunner Willis Aller, and loader Delbert Boggs moved almost automatically. Within seconds, all 5 men escaped through their hatches.
They cleared the tank just moments before the fire reached the ammunition. Seconds later, the shells inside began to explode. Miraculously, none of the crew members were injured. They were shaken, but alive. Their first Sherman, in the mood, was completely destroyed. Their first experience of combat had lasted only 5 days. But the crew did not leave the battlefield. Until they received a new tank, Poole and his men continued moving with the advancing forces. Sometimes they rode on the armor of other tanks. Sometimes they moved forward on foot. Then, on July 1st, they were issued a new and more powerful vehicle, an M4A176W Sherman, and Lafayette Pool gave the tank the same name. Once again, it became in the mood.
After the war, Lafayette Pool faced one of the hardest moments of his life. During his final battle, he had been severely wounded. His right leg had to be amputated 8 inches above the knee. Recovery was long and painful. Poole spent months learning how to walk again with a prosthetic leg. Step by step, he rebuilt his strength and independence. Eventually, he faced an important decision. He could accept a medical discharge from the Army and return to civilian life in Texas. Many soldiers in his situation would have chosen that path, but Poole made a different choice. He loved the Army. For him, the military had become more than a job. It was his life, his career, and his identity. Poole had grown up as a simple farm boy. Through discipline and determination, he had become one of the most successful American tank commanders of the war. After everything he had experienced, returning to a quiet civilian life, working as a farmer or engineer, no longer felt possible. So in July 1948, Lafayette Pool made a remarkable decision. Despite his disability, he re-enlisted in the United States Army. The Army understood the value of his experience and leadership. Instead of sending him into combat again, they gave him new responsibilities. Poole became an instructor and military advisor. In this role, he trained younger soldiers and future tank crews. He taught them the lessons he had learned in combat: how to maneuver a tank under fire, how to coordinate a crew, and how to survive on the battlefield. Poole continued serving for another 12 years. Finally, on September 19, 1960, exactly 16 years after his last battle, he retired from the Army. By that time, he had reached the rank of Chief Warrant Officer II. For Lafayette Pool, the war had ended long before, but his dedication to the Army never did.